When you close your eyes and picture the deep future of human civilization, say, the year 2100, there is a very specific image that almost always comes to mind.
Oh, absolutely. It is the endless city.
Right. You see it in almost every sci-fi movie or like any cyberpunk novel.
Yeah, it's the entire planet completely paved over in steel and glass.
Exactly. These sprawling, unfathomable megacities that just swallow up the horizon, just layer upon layer of concrete with absolutely no boundaries.
It is a deeply ingrained cultural vision, and honestly, it's a sometimes terrifying one. I mean, the idea of a concrete jungle that literally never ends.
Yeah, where nature is just completely pushed off the map by sheer human density. And, well, it feels inevitable. You look around at the construction cranes in any major city today and you think, well, of course, that's where we are heading.
It totally makes sense why you'd assume that.
But if you step back and look at a brand new massive data model, our entire sci-fi nightmare is completely mathematically wrong. That endless concrete horizon it's essentially a statistical mirage.
We have been looking at the wrong data in the wrong way for a very long time.
Which brings us to today's mission. We are going to map out exactly where humanity is actually heading over the next century.
And the research we are looking at today comes from the Complexity Science Hub, or CSH, and ETH Zurich.
And this was just published in PNAS, right?
Yes, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. It is basically one of the most prestigious, heavy-hitting peer-reviewed journals out there.
Definitely. And what they did was track global urbanization from the ground up, and the numbers they found tell a story of stabilization, not endless sprawl.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we need to get into why the old models missed the mark so badly. The sheer scale of current urbanization is what makes this new study so incredibly shocking to urban planners.
It really is. You have to understand the baseline.
Right. Let's rewind a bit to set the stage for you. In 1975, only 11% of the global population lived in massive cities, cities of over 1 million people, just 11%.
And today, researchers estimate that share has jumped to about 24%.
Which is a massive leap.
It is, and the current momentum is staggering. I mean, projections show that over the next 25 years, 1 billion people will move into cities.
1 billion.
Yeah, 1 billion. To put that into a physical, real-world perspective, you're looking at roughly the equivalent of adding one brand new New York City to the planet every 2 months.
Wait, I need to pause on that. Every 2 months.
Every 2 months.
Of brand new New York City. We are talking about laying down thousands of miles of subway tracks, pouring millions of tons of concrete, building entirely new power grids.
Hospitals, skyscrapers, housing blocks.
Yeah, every 60 days. When you hear a statistic like that, it is completely understandable why everyone assumed we were heading toward a planet-wide megacity.
You'd be crazy not to think that, looking at those numbers.
But here is the massive reveal from this new study. The researchers did not just look at that current explosive wave and assume it rides straight to the moon forever.
Oh, they didn't.
Their new model projects that by the year 2100, only 38% of the world's population will live in cities of more than 1 million people.
Which, is still a substantial portion of humanity. But it is radically lower than what the current trend projections have been feeding into climate models and economic forecasts.
Radically lower.
We are talking about a projection that results in 450 million fewer people living in million-plus cities by the end of the century compared to the old baseline forecasts.
450 million fewer people. That gap between the old prediction and this new reality, that is larger than the entire current population of the United States.
Just totally erased from the megacity forecast.
But it makes me wonder about the math. Extrapolating current trends to get those old, massive numbers, it's like watching a teenager hit a massive growth spurt at age 13, measuring that they grew 6 inches in a year and assuming they'll be 12 feet tall by age 30.
That is exactly what they were doing.
It makes zero sense when you think about it biologically. Why were our previous global projections making this exact mathematical mistake with human settlements?
What's fascinating here is that they fell into the trap of assuming that the explosive growth of large cities was a permanent condition of modernization.
Like it would just never stop.
Exactly. But what this study reveals, and what makes it so groundbreaking, is that urban systems actually possess a definitive life cycle. They do not grow exponentially forever.
Right.
Just like your teenager analogy, urban growth eventually hits a natural, predictable ceiling.
Well, let's explore that ceiling, because I really want to understand why the growth of these massive cities actually slows down. What happens in the early stages of this urban life cycle?
So in the early stages of a country's urbanization, which we've seen playing out in many Asian and African countries between 1975 and 2025, large cities grow at an incredibly rapid pace compared to smaller towns in the same country.
Like, how rapid?
The study found that in these less urbanized nations, cities with more than 1 million inhabitants grew about 7.3% faster than the average city in their respective countries.
Wow. Which, on a human level, makes total sense. People naturally flock to where the resources are concentrated.
Absolutely.
If a country is just starting to rapidly industrialize and you want access to the best hospitals, the biggest universities, the major shipping ports, and, the highest paying jobs, you have to move to the single largest urban center.
It's a first-mover advantage for capital, essentially.
All right. But the study shows that in highly urbanized countries like much of Europe and the Americas, this dynamic completely shifts.
It does. Over the last 50 years in those regions, cities with more than 1 million inhabitants grew at roughly the exact same rate as the national average.
So smaller cities and larger cities ended up growing at similar speeds.
Yeah, exactly.
Wait, I need to push back on the mechanics of that.
Sure.
If the most advanced hospitals and the most lucrative, hyper-specialized jobs are historically concentrated in the biggest cities, why wouldn't people permanently want to move there? I mean, think of it like a magnet covered in iron filings. Why does that magnetic pull weaken?
It's less like a magnet losing its pull and more like a crowded stadium.
Okay, a stadium.
Think about the megacities as the front row seats. Early on, those are incredibly valuable, and everyone rushes to grab one. But eventually, the ticket price gets entirely too high, meaning the cost of housing skyrockets.
Oh, right.
The aisles get too jammed, meaning gridlock traffic and strained infrastructure. Suddenly, sitting in the middle tiers, the mid-sized cities, offers a much better experience for the cost.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. You're not going to pay a premium to sit in the front row if someone is spilling their beer on you and you can't even get out to use the restroom.
Exactly.
You just move back a few rows to a smaller city where life is actually functional.
And at the same time, the stadium itself upgrades. As a country becomes highly urbanized, the infrastructure, technology, and economic opportunities start to distribute more evenly.
Right, so you get high-speed rail, distributed broadband, remote work, regional hospital networks.
Yeah, you no longer have to be in the single largest metropolis to find a good job or a specialized doctor.
It spreads out.
The researchers proved that countries are not following fundamentally different cultural paths here. They are simply moving through the exact same predictable stages of development, just at different points in history.
So Europe went through its explosive phase, and now it has leveled out. Parts of Asia and Africa are in their explosive phase right now, and they will eventually level out too.
Exactly.
But wait, if urban planners have been tracking city growth for decades, how did everyone else miss this life cycle? What were they looking at that this team from ETH, Zurich, and CSH didn't?
That is the million-dollar question.
Because to prove the stadium theory globally, the methodology has to be bulletproof. And according to this study, the reason everyone missed it is that we have literally been defining the word city completely wrong.
We have. Previous studies almost universally relied on administrative boundaries to define a city.
Okay.
But administrative boundaries are wildly misleading. They are lines drawn up by politicians, sometimes centuries ago, for tax purposes or voting districts. They do not reflect the physical reality of where humans actually live and work.
I think about Paris when you say that. The official city of Paris is actually quite small in terms of its administrative borders.
Very small, yeah.
But the lived, breathing metropolis of Paris spills way, way over those invisible lines. Or New York. It is vastly more than just the 5 boroughs. The tri-state commuter zone is massive.
It's huge.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Measuring a city by its political borders is like judging the size of an octopus by only measuring its head and completely ignoring the tentacles.
Right.
You are missing the vast majority of the actual creature.
This raises an important question, right? Because those administrative definitions vary so widely across different regions and countries, you simply cannot accurately compare them globally.
Because everyone measures the head differently.
Exactly. A mayor in Germany defines a city boundary completely differently than a local governor in Brazil. The researchers realized they had to scrap that entire approach.
So what do they do instead?
To get real answers, they built 2 massive new data sets from the ground up, using geographic boundaries, the actual physical footprint of the built environment, instead of political ones.
Okay, so to measure the whole octopus, they built dataset 1. This tracked 99 countries, which covers an astounding 94% of the global population expected in 2025. And it spans the years from 1975 to 2025.
That's a huge amount of data.
And instead of looking at local maps, they used satellite imagery. They literally watched the light signatures and physical concrete of cities expand across the landscape over time.
Yeah, that satellite data gave them the modern global picture.
Yeah.
But to prove the life cycle theory, they needed deep historical context.
Right.
So they built Dataset 2, which reconstructed the history of American cities all the way from 1850 to 2020.
Wait, how do you even track geographic sprawl before satellites? I mean, if they couldn't use political maps, how do you map an octopus in 1850?
Painstaking data wrangling. I mean, they drew on more than 500 million individual historical census records.
500 million?
Yes. They meticulously matched the addresses and locations of those 500 million records to roughly 40,000 historical places.
That is just, wow. Handwritten census ledgers, changing county lines, ghost towns that don't even exist anymore.
It was a massive undertaking.
The way they synthesized all this is brilliant. They divided the world into tiny 1 square kilometer grid cells. They would look at a cell and determine based on population density and the built-up area whether it was urban or rural. Then they simply tracked how those urban cells physically linked together, clustered, and grew over time, completely ignoring whatever the politicians called that area.
Think about how flawed localized administrative data has been tricking economists and urban planners for 50 years. We have been making massive global predictions based on a patchwork of mismatched definitions.
That is wild.
Frank Nefke, the lead of the Transforming Economies Research Group at CSH, pointed out that creating this globally harmonized way to define city size was the crucial breakthrough.
Because otherwise you're just comparing apples and oranges.
Exactly. Without it, you cannot compare individual cities, let alone entire urban systems across space and time. They finally created an apples-to-apples global comparison.
Well, now that we actually know where people are going to live, and we have this accurate grid cell map of the future, we have to look at the real-world consequences of packing humanity into these clusters.
Because there are consequences for sure.
Big ones. We are talking about what researchers call superlinear trade-offs. The extreme multiplied costs and benefits of putting millions of human beings into tightly concentrated geographic areas.
The term superlinear effects essentially means the physics of human density. As a city grows, certain characteristics don't just increase proportionally with the population, they multiply dramatically.
Okay, so it's not a 1-to-1 ratio.
Right, 1 plus 1 doesn't equal 2, it equals 3 or 4.
Let's unpack the bad news first, because the friction of density is intense. According to studies of U.S. cities referenced in the research, if you live in a city of 1 million people, you are going to spend more than twice as much time sitting in traffic compared to someone living in a town of 10,000.
Which anyone who commutes in a big city can attest to.
Right. It's a geometric problem. You are funneling way too many people into shared bottleneck spaces, and it gets much worse for your health. You are nearly 3 times more likely to contract certain diseases.
Yeah, the physical proximity breeds pathogens. You have the shared air, the dense public transit, the friction of daily life, and the strain on public health increase significantly.
That sounds miserable.
It can be. But the flip side of that density is precisely why humans endure the traffic and the health risks. Residents of that exact same million-person city are more than 3 times as innovative and almost twice as productive as those in the smaller town.
3 times as innovative. How does that actually work mechanically? I mean, why does just standing closer to people make you invent more things?
It comes down to network density and the concept of knowledge spillover.
Knowledge spillover.
Yeah. In a town of 10,000, if you have a highly niche, specialized idea, let's say you want to build a very specific type of left-handed surgical instrument. Maybe one other person in town understands it, and there's no local market.
You're kind of on your own.
Right. But in a city of 1 million, you have a whole community of specialists. You have the financing, the supply chain, and the buyers, all within a subway ride.
Oh, that makes sense.
Ideas collide faster, people switch jobs, and innovations serendipitously combine into new breakthroughs. It's the classic coffee shop collision effect, but scaled up to millions of interactions a day.
That is a massive return on investment for dealing with the crowds. But wait, this brings up a really critical contradiction.
What's that?
Well, if moving to a massive city naturally doubles human productivity through all these collisions, but this new ETH Zurich study proves that large cities inherently lose their rapid growth advantage as a country fully urbanizes. Does that mean a country's economic engine inherently stalls out once it hits that ceiling? I mean, if the cities stop growing so fast, does the innovation stop?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you've hit on the exact macroeconomic tension the researchers highlight. As Frank Nefke points out, the rapid rise of large cities in developing nations is a remarkably powerful driver of economic growth, precisely because it doubles that productivity.
Right.
But their findings mathematically prove that this specific driver gradually loses momentum as countries mature. The superlinear boost of the megacity slows down as the population stops flooding in.
Wow. So the well runs dry, essentially.
This fundamentally changes how nations have to think about generating future wealth.
Yeah.
You cannot simply rely on funneling millions of rural workers into a single megacity to juice your GDP forever. That strategy has an expiration date.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Why should you care about superlinear effects and 1 square kilometer grid cells? Because these numbers aren't just, academic trivia to sound smart at a dinner party.
Not at all.
Decisions about global infrastructure, housing, transport, energy grids, and climate adaptation all fundamentally depend on knowing exactly where people will actually live in the future.
We are talking about trillions of dollars in real-world investments. If you are a city planner, you need to know if you are pouring concrete for a subway system that must handle an endless exponential influx of residents, or for a population that is going to stabilize in 20 years.
That is a huge difference in budgeting.
Exactly. Or if you are deciding where to allocate billion-dollar climate adaptation funds to build seawalls or drought-resistant water grids, you need highly accurate maps of human density in 2050 and 2100.
Even if you are just a business owner deciding where to open a new regional headquarters, or just a family trying to figure out where to buy a house and put down roots for the next 30 years, the study is basically a cheat sheet for the future.
It really is.
The map of tomorrow looks vastly different than the current endless sprawl hype suggests. It's not just going to be a few giant, all-consuming cities sucking up all the oxygen.
It replaces fear with foresight. Instead of panicking about endless megacity sprawl and the total collapse of regional systems, decision-makers finally have a reliable, scientifically backed urban life cycle to guide their strategies. The future is knowable.
It really is. So let's wrap up this journey. We started with this terrifying sci-fi projection of an endless planet-wide megacity. But by looking at harmonized geographic data, literally measuring the built environment from space, instead of relying on flawed political maps, this CSH and ETH Zurich study revealed a much more stabilizing reality.
Much more balanced.
Yes, there is a massive 1 billion person wave of urbanization currently happening, but it won't result in an endlessly accelerating megacity trend. Because of this predictable urban life cycle, massive cities will eventually hit a growth ceiling, resulting in 450 million fewer megacity residents by 2100 than the old models feared.
The stadium fills up, the front row tickets get too expensive, the growth normalizes across the mid-tiers, and the entire system becomes a lot more manageable.
But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. If the massive economic and innovative boost of the megacity inevitably loses its momentum,
Right.
and if smaller cities eventually catch up in their growth speed and infrastructure as the country matures, will the cultural and economic power centers of 2100 shift completely away from legacy megacities like New York, London, or Tokyo?
That is a fascinating question.
Will all that influence and wealth diffuse entirely into previously overlooked mid-sized cities? Cities that can offer a better balance of productivity without the superlinear traffic and disease.
If the megacity loses its unique monopoly on innovation, the agile mid-sized city might just inherit the future.
Something to think about the next time you look out at your own city's skyline. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this helps you view the concrete horizon not as an endless, terrifying sprawl, but as a living, breathing system with a natural, predictable rhythm. Until next time.